Well, welcome back to the shop in Toronto. This is James. This is the second video that I'm making up for our friends at the Catskill Rod Makers Gathering, held every September in Roscoe, New York. I went the first time in the year 2000 with my friend George. I know he'd been a few years earlier. It happens every year. It's a long-standing rod gathering. It's the most famous one in the United States, and we're thrilled to go down there every year. But of course, with the COVID pandemic, not possible this year. Our border's now closed till the 21st of September, so definitely not able to head down there anytime soon, but we are anxious to get down there and see our friends and reconnect with everyone, but unfortunately that won't be happening anytime soon. So what we're going to do today is we're going to make a reel seat. Well, we're going to make the sliding band nickel silver parts. Maybe I'll make another video someday about making the wooden inserts. But one of the frustrating things about making a rod, you put in the 50 plus hours and you've put your heart and soul, you're super proud of it, and then you're putting on a reel seat that 10 other people have, and I guess that's okay, but to me it always kind of bothered me, and I wish that just like I could tie my own flies or make my own rod, I always wished that I could make my own reel seat hardware, which at the time seemed like an impossible task. But about 20 years or so ago, again, George, and I know that some other guys, John Zimney, were all involved, and they put together a bulk order for this nickel silver tubing. This is 752 alloy, often called German nickel silver. And it's basically a tube that's 750 or 3/4 of an inch outside diameter, and the inside diameter is 0.680 of an inch. So that's the material that we use. And using the lathe, we cut off some pieces, make some rings, a ring for the butt cap and a ring for the sliding band. Then we take a nickel silver slug. Now this little coin was made from nickel silver flat stock, which you can buy anywhere readily on the internet. And that's punched out with a die. And then we put these two pieces together and solder them, and you end up with sort of a nasty looking slug like this. And then we clean it up on the lathe, make some different size restrictions on it and some trim decoration, perhaps some knurling on the edges like this one here, and we end up with a really nice set of hardware. And of course you have to make your own wooden insert also. But it's a fairly simple task on the lathe, intermediate level project. You're going to need a couple things, however, to hold your parts. Now this piece was drawn up by Gary Dabrowski in one of the earlier workshops that he did again at the Roscoe Catskills Rod Makers Gathering. And this holds our butt cap. So that slides on, and we use this little simple nut and bolt to expand and draw, and then we put this in the lathe and spin that, and we can do all of our work from there. And then I also got this one. This is a commercial one. Now this one has a tightening screw at the front, so it only really works for the sliding bands. But this was a stock 3/4 that I bought, and I just turned it down to the, actually it's a 690 dimension that I use for the inside of the sliding band. And that holds that, and that can spin in the lathe. So with all these different little mandrels and the raw material, you can make a really nice reel seat like this one here. Now this little piece I made here, you can see I haven't decorated it yet. So it's plain. I've just built this feature at the end. It's a little bit larger ring, but you can put on little circles in the bottom to give it a nice look. This one has a couple trim lines on the side and a knurling at the top. So that's up to you. This can be knurled, this can just be left plain, this can have a couple lines on it. It's really up to the rod maker. You can make them uniquely different. I tend to go out in the lathe and I'll make maybe 12 of them the same and set them aside, and then at any time I can decorate them any way I want to make it look unique or to match something. It's totally up to me. Now these work with a mortised wooden reel seat. So if this wasn't mortised or thinned or ovalized, whatever you want to call it, then you would need a pocketed butt cap that sits proud and has a pocket built into it. But this is just a plain ring. So these inserts here, which are 680 OD, you then run them on the router to form that oval. It can also be done with a rasp. Absolutely, people have done it with a rasp. So fairly simple to make as well. Now in this one here, I don't have a grip ring at the front. That's a feature that you can add or not add. Some people, want as minimum decoration as possible. Some people want a little more decoration. I tend to put one on there, but it's totally optional and up to you. And these tend to run about 3.5 inches in length. And this is a piece of Ontario ash that I turned up and put some poly finish on it, and it looks really nice. So that's what we're going to do. When the lathe work, I'm going to assume that whoever is tackling this project has a lathe and understands, how to use a parting tool and the different cutters that you need. But it is a very simple lathe project. What's really important on these projects is that you spend some time to make sure that your proportions are correct. If this ring was another 1/4 inch taller, it would look awkward. So look at some classic rods, measure some classic rods like F.E. Thomas type rods, the Leonard rods. They give you a good sense of proportion as to how much things can be. But when they're off, they do look a little bit clunky. So, if you ever see a rod that you really like, measure the hardware on it for sure. It really helps you get a sense of proportion. And this little trim ring here, a sliding band, has some knurling on it. Has a couple of decorative rings where I just went in with a cutter and made some lines on it. So you can make them as fancy or as simple as you want. So the next step of this, we're going to run outside to the garage where my big ancient lathe lives. And just for your information, it's a Harrison lathe that's made in England, 1968. And it weighs about 1,500 pounds, so it's pretty big. It has a swing of 12 inches, and the through bar on the headstock is 1 3/8 inches. And it's pretty much the kind of size that you would see in a high school type shop. A little bit small for a professional machine shop, but it works perfect for what I need to do for my rod work and my reel seats and the other projects that I do on the lathe. So that's the lathe. So the next step, we'll be out there. We're going to part off some rings for the butt cap, part off some rings of a different size for the sliding band. We're then going to come back in here, I guess, and do some soldering. We're going to solder this coin or flat stock nickel silver onto it. And then we're going to mount the soldered pieces onto the mandrels and do all the finishing. So those are the steps that we're going to take. And I look forward to showing you those in part 2. See you there. Hey guys, welcome back. I've just zoomed in and we're going to do some soldering here, but before we look at the footage of me parting off the section to make the butt cap, then boring out the ID to 690 to make the ring a little bit bigger on the inside, and then parting that off, I just want to talk a little bit about making these videos. I enjoy doing them, but it's absolutely crazy how long something takes. So I had spent about 40 minutes or so trying to set up the camera to show me parting off the parts of the nickel silver, but I couldn't get one because my lathe is tucked in the corner and it's extremely difficult to get there, and then my body's in the way and it looks stupid. So I just grabbed my iPhone and shot the footage with that. So I apologize that it's shaky for that little bit because it's held my hand. But what takes 5 minutes to do something takes a day, it seems like, when you're filming it for these things, the camera and the angles and the lighting and the audio. And so I enjoy doing them, but holy Mackinac, sometimes it's just insane. So that's why the footage is a little bit shaky on the parting off. But I'm going to switch to a different camera, so when we put these new piece on the mandrel, we're going to have a little better look. I'll have an overhead, sort of a GoPro type camera to shoot that for me. So anyway, there's the ring that we parted off in the first shot. And there's that little slug that we made. I'm going to be using a little bit of this Tix solder. This is jewelry supply stuff. And it's been chopped up into little pieces so I can drop them inside. And we're going to use this Tix flux as our flux for the part. And I'm just going to use a regular household plumbing type torch to heat it up. And even though it looks a little bit ratty, as soon as you put it on the mandrel and put it on the lathe, it cleans back up beautifully. So sorry for the crappy footage you're about to see on the parting off of the rings. Okay, we're back. So I put a little bead of flux all through that little coin. Then I dropped in a few pieces of solder, positioned that with the bodkin all around the perimeter. And now I'm ready just to give it some heat, and here we go. So as I was looking down inside, I could see the point where the solder started to melt, and it just found its way all around that bead, sealed it all up. And as I mentioned before, we're just going to let that sit for 10 minutes or something for that solder to harden up. So the next step will be to mount that on the mandrel, the Gary Dabrowski inspired mandrel that I made on the lathe, and turn this butt cap, and then the same thing with the sliding band. So next time you see me, we're going to be out at the big lathe again with a stationary camera so you can have a good look at what we're doing, and I look forward to showing you that in the next part of the video. Okay, so finally this crazy person who talks too much is going to start making this part. So here we go. We've got the butt cap that we soldered on the mandrel, and just put a little cutting fluid on there. It makes for a better cut, also helps your tools last a little bit longer. And we're going to do a face cut on the back end of this thing. Got to remember the nickel silver material is not super thick here, so just taking a few thou off is all you need to do, so you get a clean looking part with no rust or tarnish or anything left on it. So you can see it's taking a pretty decent cut there. I've got the lathe set up on a power feed, so that's just all being done manually. I don't have to crank the handles. And then we're going to change direction of the slide there, and we're going to make the same pass the full length of the part all the way till the end, till we get a nice clean piece of nickel silver. And again, we're only taking off a few thousandths of an inch. That's all that's necessary at this point. And then we're going to stop. We're going to check and see if there's any low spots on the material, and I think after the first pass there is a low spot, so time will tell on that one. So I'm doing this as a voiceover after the fact, so it's not live, so to speak. So here we go. Again, the lathe's back on power feed. Nickel silver is mostly copper, interestingly enough, so I think it's like 75% copper, 70, somewhere around there. Mostly copper anyway, but it's very shiny. Actually, you can see now there's a low spot on the material, so we'll have to make a second pass, again of a few thousandths of an inch. This material has about a wall thickness of 35 thou, so you got a little bit of material to work with. But we're going to have to create a feature. So once we get a clean pass on a full length, then we're going to have to move the cutter and stop before the end of the part to create that ledge or shelf or feature of the part at the top end that we're going to ultimately put a knurl on. So here we go. Got this thing going up now pretty well. And I'm just feeling with my finger to see how much of a feature we have. I know it's not quite prominent enough, so we'll make another pass. You know, when you make a dozen of these, what you do is you know exactly how far you're going on each one. You set it up so they're all repetitive, so they're all the same. You don't have to sort of keep checking. You just whoosh, whoosh, make a couple passes, take off 10th thou or whatever it is, and get your feature. But when you make the first one, it's always just a little bit of a better idea to go slowly and find your way. It's a pretty good, nice cut there, taking off some fair amount of material. So now we've got the quick change tool post. Oh, we're going to make another pass, it looks like. Well, there you go. Couldn't trust my memory. I guess it wasn't quite prominent enough. Yeah, we're just forming the bump on the end that's going to be knurled. So probably ultimately we've taken off with the 2 cleanup passes and the removal, probably 10 to 12, maybe 15 thou total. So the wall thickness is still, over 20 thousandths of an inch. So there we go. And the quick change tool post, we can pop that out and put in the knurling tool. Now we're doing another pass. Wow. Terrible memory. And there we go. Doing play-by-play of a lathe, something I never thought I would be doing. We'll see if I've passed the finger test here. Yeah, looks like it. So now with that corner is very sharp, obviously from the facing off. That's a really sharp corner, and all the parts on the part all the corners of the part have to feel nice to your hand and be rounded off or chamfered or deburred, whatever the case may be. So with that, we're just getting a hand file and just giving that a nice little relief cut and making that feel pleasing to the hand. Super important. Anytime you machine anything, you don't want to end up with sharp corners. Alright, so off comes that one, and we're going to put on the knurling tool. Now, the knurling tool it puts a lot of side pressure on a lathe. They're not really good for the lathe, on the bearings and so on. You're putting a lot of pressure on it, but it's not really a cutting operation. It's a forming operation, so it's basically, you're not removing any metal, you're displacing it. So we're going to end up with a nice straight knurl pattern, and that's formed just by turning that cutter into the part from the side. And we also turn down the speed of the lathe. You can see it's turning a lot slower. It doesn't take long to form it. And the nickel silver is, a little bit hard material, but not too bad. It's hard to see the part because it's covered in the cutting oil, but it's pretty shiny right now, and that knurl is now completed. So the next thing we're going to do on this part is just put a couple of decorative lines. So here's a little cutter that I'm just going to turn by hand, and this is going to put a couple of lines on the end of the butt cap just to break up the coin look and give it a bit of a feature. So we're going to put one on the outside, and then we're going to turn the cutter in a little bit more, and we'll put a second one in there. And then we're going to take that part out of the tool holder and move it around so I can put it in to go the opposite direction. I actually have to take the Allen screws off and turn that part around so that it can go into the other direction from the quick change tool post. You can actually see in the top corner of this lathe there's a little dial and a knob. That's a Travadial, and that basically keeps track of the long axis of the lathe, so when you're making a part like this you can keep turning it back to a predetermined spot. So it's kind of like a DRO before the DROs were popular. So here we go, we've got this cutter in place, and we're going to just put a couple of features on the side, a little line here, and then a little line lower to the butt cap. And that's it. All the machining of this part is done. It took only maybe 4 or 5 minutes. I am going to run some sandpaper on it just to clean up any cutter marks and any leftover ridges from when we used that tool to cut the lines, and just give it a little more pleasing feel to it. So I got some 400, 600, and 1200, and that's just the cutting oil that's on there. And so the part looks quite dull because the cutting oil is making it look dull, but it's actually, if you ran a Kleenex over it, it would just shine up right now already. By using the different degrees of paper, it gives it a nice little shine when you're all done. And ultimately, I'll wash this in soap and warm water just to degrease or some Dawn and get all the oil off it, and it'll look shiny, 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 like we're used to seeing. And there we go. Just working. It doesn't take much. There you go. And this is the 1200 paper, the final one. One nice thing about metalworking, the machines are fairly quiet and they're quite safe. It's not like woodworking where you've got a router blade or a saw blade looking to chop your finger off. You can still do stupid things metalworking, but overall it's quite a safe pursuit compared to woodworking. Now we've got the sliding band. Now if you recall, we ran the boring bar on the raw tube of this sliding band to make it 690. And we did that so that when it's on the wooden insert, it slides freely up and down. Where on the butt cap, we want a nice snug fit so we can glue it onto the wooden insert. So the internal diameter of the sliding band is about 10 thou greater. So this is 690. And that's why we're using a separate expanding mandrel. Because the other one is 680. So once you make the tool, you've got it for life. And this was an inexpensive tool that was $750. I just put it on the lathe and turned it down to $690, and I'll use that tool forever to make this part. So it's nice once you get the work done and you get the parts that you need. Things happen really, really quickly. So here we go. We're just now making a few passes to create that feature, or that raised section on the top of the part, and then we're going to knurl that one again as well, and then we're also going to put one of those little feature lines on there just to break up the boredom. But like I said, it's up to you when you're making the part to make them uniquely your own, and you don't have to copy the Leonard or the F.E. Thomas styles. You can make it as plain or as fancy. Some guys send them out and get them engraved by these gun engraver guys. You can do whatever you want. It's totally up to you to do it the way that you want to do it. And just a reminder, whenever you're running the knurling tool, just turn the RPM down and make sure you got some cutting fluid on there, because this is an operation that's hard on your lathe. You never want to buy a used lathe that was used in a factory that just sat there knurling every day, because it's a lot of side pressure on the bearings, and the bearings really aren't designed to have a lot of side pressure on them. They're more of a high-speed bearing. So there you go. We've got that knurled. And we're going to put that cutter back in and put one decorative trim line on there. All right, here we go. So same as the other part, you know, polish it up with some papers to get off any of the lines that the cutter may have left, or any ridges left over from the trim and the side edge of the knurl that may be sharp and unpleasing to the hand. And then we're also, in the next phase, I'm going to loosen that ring and pull it off a little bit so that I can access the inside of the ring and spend some time cleaning up the inside corners, because those are the ones that can chew up your reel seat. So you want to make sure that those are properly chamfered and there's no sharp edges in there. And actually I did that on the butt cap. I didn't show it. I just put it in the collet, the reverse direction with the hole facing out, and ran some sandpaper on the inside of the part just to make sure there was no burr and to take away that sharp edge. There you go. I've moved that part now so that it's protruding, and I'm able to get in the inside of the tube to, again, like I just talked about, just clean that up and make it nice and safe and friendly to your reel seat. You know, the reel seats are often aluminum, which are softer, of course, than nickel silver, so they're the ones that suffer the problems in the wear. So make sure you spend some time doing that. And on this part, I actually also removed it and put it in the other way so that both ends of this little mini tube were cleaned up with a few different grits of sandpaper, just to make sure that there was a bit of a ramp there and nothing sharp to mar up your reel seat. Oh, there we go. Well, we're back. It's funny, these videos take, half an hour, but you see out of the machine it takes hardly any time. But this is what the finished product looks like. Nice little clean piece. We've got our couple of trim rings there at the back that we did outside. You can see there, and nice fit here on the nose, just sticking out. The fit is more a function of how big you cut the mortise on the part, more so than the actual hardware itself. But yeah, we popped that out pretty quickly once we got machining, and give it a little polish, and it looks really, really nice. Remember how terrible it looked when we brought it off the soldering table. And it's going to get some focus. Are we going to focus? There we go. Nice straight knurl. Couple trim lines at the rear, one trim line at the front, and everything's all burnished and cleaned up and ready to go. So, not bad. Fun project, fairly easy to do. I think the hardest thing for most people is tracking down that nickel silver material, but it is out there. But you can also make it from aluminum, and you can, instead of soldering, you can take a solid piece of aluminum and just on the lathe, get a milling cutter and hollow it out and make it that way. But anyway, there's your nickel silver hardware. Fun little project, ready to go. And I'm going to say goodbye now, but I also invite everyone to our gathering up in Canada. Canadian Cane, of course, happens every 2 years, and we're hoping, pandemic permitting, that we're going to be running in the Memorial Day weekend next year, 2021. But of course, that's all subject to change at this point. But everyone's welcome up in Canada once that border's open, and we look forward to seeing you up there. If not, we look forward to seeing you down in Roscoe, New York, in the Catskills, one of the most beautiful spots on earth, I got to tell you. Anyway, signing off. Stay well, stay safe.